They called it a throwaway, a skeletal Mustang lying motionless in the dust offered for a non-negotiable $1. No one expected the young girl, Sadie McGraw, to step out from the crowd, pull out a crumpled bill and say, "I'll take him." They chuckled, but no one laughed after that. Because what Sadie rescued wasn't just a horse, it was a buried truth, a soul that could never be tamed. The air at the Weatherford auction yard was thick, like old axle grease mixed with hay dust, sweat, and the sting of lime from horse stalls. The sky hung low in a dirty gray, clouds billowing like the remnants of half-dead ashes. Beneath the groaning tin roof, people whispered, murmured, and then fell silent, as if someone had swallowed the sound whole. Sadie McGraw stood at the edge of the crowd, hands stuffed deep into the pockets of her faded denim jacket. The wind cut through to her bones. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been here, only that her father was still alive then, standing tall in the yard, one hand gripping a lead rope, the other slapping a saddle, saying in that firm voice of his, "Any horse left behind, we take home." Today, there was no one left to say that. In the middle of the dusty auction floor, a Mustang lay collapsed. Bones jutted beneath a hide as thin as paper. Its coat, once a rich chestnut, had dulled to a tarnished bronze. Its head rested limp beside a mound of sour straw, and on its forehead a chalk-white mark, perfectly shaped like a heart. A splintered wooden sign was staked near its head. $1, non-negotiable, no mercy, final price of surrender. No one looked at it long. Some shook their heads, some spat. Most just pretended to be busy on their phones or focused on the sleek thoroughbreds being led from their stalls. This horse, whatever it once was no longer a horse. It was trash that hadn't yet been swept away. Sadie stepped slowly through the packed crowd. Her mud-caked boots squelched with every step on the pitted concrete. All sound faded as she knelt beside the creature. Her heart clenched the moment she met its eyes. They weren't lifeless. No, they held something else. Memories no one but her could recognize. "Ridge," she whispered, like calling a spirit by name. The horse didn't move, but its lashes flickered. Back when Ridge was just a foal, she was the barefoot kid chasing chickens with a bottle in hand and a straw hat too big for her head. Ridge had been the shadow at her heels. He once tripped over a root and fell flat, and her father had laughed. "He's the only horse I've seen that falls down and still keeps his head high." Now he could barely lift his head at all. The auctioneer, an old man with a swollen gut, sunburnt cheeks, and a voice soaked in beer, tapped the mic with his gavel. "Lot 57, $1, no takers, we move on." Sadie rose to her feet. Her voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the air. "I'll take him." The auctioneer paused. "Excuse me, miss. I said I'll take him," Sadie repeated, pulling a crumpled $1 bill from her pocket. She placed it on the wooden sign like an offering. No one laughed, no one spoke, but the entire space turned to stillness. She leaned down, pressed her forehead gently against Ridge's. His skin was cold as stone, but there was breath, thin as smoke, but there. "No one gets to decide if you live," she whispered, "except you." A man in a checkered shirt muttered behind her, shaking his head. "She just lost $1 for nothing." Sadie turned, eyes unwavering. "I didn't buy this horse. I kept a promise." She didn't wait for permission. She took Ridge, more dragged than led, out of the auction yard. Each step was a tremble through his wasted body, like the next gust might shatter him completely. As she got him to her battered old truck, the rain came, hard and fast. She exhaled, smelling thunder in the drops, something returning. Not an ending, a beginning. Ridge knew nothing of the whispers, the pitying glances, or the single dollar they'd put on his head. But as he lifted one trembling leg onto the trailer and glanced back at her, Sadie knew. He was still in there, still her Ridge. $1 had bought a life the world had already written off, but what it truly bought was the beginning of something no one saw coming. Texas rain at night wasn't like anywhere else. It didn't pour like waterfalls, nor drift down like breath. It sliced through the air like blades, sharp and cold. As Sadie drove her battered 1997 Ford pickup out of the auction yard, the tires carved deep into patches of red mud. Her headlights barely reached 10 paces ahead, and in the back, rattling softly in the trailer, Ridge lay motionless, little more than skin stretched over bone. Sadie didn't dare glance in the rearview mirror. Her hands clung to the steering wheel, arms trembling, not just from cold, but from fear. from the creeping thought she didn't want to admit. Was I out of my mind for doing this? The road home was an old dirt path, now rutted deep by the rain. What should have taken 20 minutes took over an hour. Every jolt made her flinch, listening to Ridge's strained breathing, each inhale like something being dragged from the grave. Finally, she reached the rotting wooden gate that marked the entrance to her father's ranch, the same land she now lived on alone. Her mother had died of lung cancer. Her father, a stroke in the barn, collapsed on a pile of hay he hadn't yet cleared. There were no working stables left. All Sadie had was a half-collapsed shed near the garden, once used by her father to repair saddles, forge shoes, and store his horse training journals. She laid an old mattress over the floor. It wasn't soft, but better than cold cement. With a makeshift pulley and splintered pallet, she inched Ridge down from the trailer and dragged him into shelter. Every motion was a tug-of-war with death. Rain battered the wooden walls. A dim oil lamp swayed in the corner, its amber glow dancing across the scars on Ridge's emaciated body. Sadie covered him with a torn quilt, her hand trembling as she touched his dry, fragile skin. Ridge let out a long breath, like it was the last air he had. Sadie dropped beside him, ear pressed to his chest. Silence. Nothing. Her heart clenched. Then, from somewhere deep, a faint beat. Weak, sparse, but real. Still alive. She placed a hand on her own chest, then turned to Ridge, tears spilling before she could stop them. You're not dying here. Not like this. Not like some piece of garbage. The wind outside howled through the cracks in the planks. It carried cold, mud, and the scent of loneliness. Half an hour passed. Then came the sound of tires crunching the gravel outside. Sadie stood, legs numb. She opened the door, oil lamp raised, squinting through the rain. It was Ellis Boone, her 60-year-old neighbor. A man who rarely smiled. Former welder, the kind who always muttered, "All the good horses are dead." He carried a sack of oats, a can of warm water, and several tubes of antibiotics. Sadie didn't ask how he knew. Out here, things didn't always need to be said aloud. This one. "You sure she's savable?" he asked, eyes on Ridge. "No," Sadie replied. "But I'm not letting him die alone." Ellis nodded. "That's enough." Through the night, they took turns wiping Ridge down, easing medicine past his lips, keeping him warm. When Ellis finally left, it was nearly dawn. Sadie stayed by the oil lamp. She pulled out her mother's old book, Charlotte's Web, and began to read aloud. One morning, Wilbur awoke and found that the web had words. She didn't read for Ridge. She read so she wouldn't fall apart. The wind still screamed. Rain hammered the doors like pleading hands. But inside, a tiny world resisted inch by inch. She didn't cry anymore. Her tears had run dry the moment she saw Ridge on that auction floor. Now there was only one thing left: waiting. As dawn neared, in the icy silence, Ridge twitched a hind leg. Sadie froze. Another twitch, soft as breath. Then his ears flicked. "Ridge," she called, her voice hoarse. "Can you hear me?" No answer. But his head moved an inch, then another, slowly lifting from the straw, like the sun trying to rise through a frozen horizon. His dull, gray eyes found hers. Not focused, but not empty. Sadie leapt, fetched a bowl of water, held it to his lips. He didn't drink, but his tongue touched the edge. That was enough, more than enough for hope to rise again. She sat beside him, gripping his mane, her hands shaking. "We'll make it, Ridge. You're not garbage. You're not throwaway." The rain softened. Only the sound of drops remained, like whispers from the earth. When the first rays of morning pierced through the wooden slats and touched the straw, Sadie was still there, hand resting on Ridge's neck. She hadn't slept, hadn't moved, and Ridge was still breathing. Faint, but real. No one knows what keeps a creature alive through death's door. But Sadie knew. Ridge was still fighting for her. 3 days after the auction, the sky still refused to clear. The ground around Sadie's house had turned to mush, clinging to the soles of her boots every time she crossed the patch of grass leading to the shed. Ridge had started eating small servings of watered-down oatmeal. Thanks to the pulley system Ellis had built using old steel frames and rusty ropes, the horse could now stand for a few minutes each day. Sadie cared for Ridge with a quiet devotion. She didn't count the hours. She didn't think about the missed shifts at the gas station or respond to the polite text check-ins. Her world had shrunk down to the rhythm of Ridge's breathing. Every flick of his ear, every slow swish of his tail, felt like witnessing a miracle. But she knew silence like that wouldn't last. In a town like Weatherford, you didn't need social media or news articles for word to spread. A single sideways glance, a whisper carried by wind, and the whole town would murmur behind your back. And sure enough, by the fourth day, the whispers had grown teeth. McGraw's girl brought home a bag of bones? That the same kid who used to fall off every horse she rode thinks she's a vet now? Her daddy must be rolling in his grave, seeing her do something this stupid. Sadie heard the words at the general store while waiting in line to buy antiseptic. She didn't answer. She didn't lower her eyes. She only gripped the bottle tighter and stared straight ahead. That night, rain returned, heavier than before. Thunder crashed on the shed roof like a warning. Sadie couldn't sleep. She lay on a thin blanket near Ridge's stall, the oil lamp flickering like a heartbeat running out of time. Then came the crunch of tires on gravel. Her pulse spiked. No one should have been coming at this hour. Ellis had already gone home. She hadn't called anyone. She grabbed the lamp and moved to the door, squinting through the downpour. A rust-red pickup sat just beyond the broken fence. The engine rumbled briefly, then fell quiet. The door creaked open. A tall man stepped out, broad shoulders under a drenched leather jacket. A wide-brimmed hat obscured half his face. But when he raised his head, stepping into the flickering light, Sadie felt the chill crawl down her spine. Even after 10 years, she knew. Colt Danner, she said, like speaking a name that should have stayed buried. He stopped a few feet away, rain sheeting off his coat. His face was more hollow, more weathered, but still the same. The same man who appeared in every photo beside her father. The same man who stood silently at the funeral, then vanished without a trace. "Heard you picked up a dead horse," Colt said, his voice rough with old whiskey and older smoke. Sadie didn't respond. She stood between him and the shed, as if her body could shield Ridge from whatever Colt brought with him. From behind her, Ridge stirred, a heavy breath. He lifted his head, eyes turning toward Colt, not with fear, not even anger, recognition. Colt stepped closer. "He's alive?" he whispered. "I didn't think I could keep him alive?" Sadie cut in, voice cold as the rain. "Or didn't think he'd survive what you left him in?" Colt's mouth clamped shut. Wind howled through the cracks in the walls. He stared into the stall, watching Ridge slowly raise his head. The horse's gaze held him like a mirror reflecting 10 years of silence. "Your dad," Colt began. "No." Sadie raised a hand. "You don't get to say his name. Not after you ran. Left him with debt, disgrace, and a stable full of undocumented horses sold off like scrap." Colt dropped his eyes. She saw his fingers tighten around the brim of his hat. A long pause. "He wasn't wrong," Colt said at last. We were trying to prove bloodlines weren't everything. That a horse, like Ridge, could be more than those blue blood pedigrees the registry worships." Sadie gave a bitter laugh. "And when the registry found out, you ran." He collapsed. Colt lifted his head slowly, pain plain in his eyes. "I was going to come back, I swear. But your father made me promise. If it all went south, I wasn't to tell you what we'd done." Sadie took a step forward. "What did you do?" Colt looked from her to Ridge, then back. "Ridge wasn't registered. We bred him with wild Mustang blood. No paperwork, no declaration. Your dad believed freedom, grit, and loyalty were worth more than any lineage." The wind picked up. Thunder rolled beyond the hills. Sadie couldn't speak. Her body swayed like the ground beneath had tilted. Everything she believed, Ridge abandoned because he was weak, because he failed, was now part of a buried rebellion. This horse wasn't a mistake. He was a living protest. She turned to look at Ridge. The horse had risen in the stall, trembling but proud, his eyes no longer those of something discarded. They belonged to a survivor. Sadie whispered, "We're waking up a war they already lost, aren't we?" Colt nodded slowly. "And this time, no one runs." Sadie realized she hadn't just saved a horse. She was reviving a secret the whole town tried to bury. A week after the confrontation in the rain, the skies still held no sun. Cold wind crept through the old wooden shed like whispers from the past. But inside, life stirred. Slow, persistent, unyielding. Ridge could now stand on his own for a few minutes each morning, helped along by the makeshift harness and gentle nudges from Sadie. Sometimes she caught him trying by himself, back arched, legs trembling as if testing his strength. His limbs were still unsteady, but his eyes had changed. No longer cloudy, no longer adrift in exhaustion. Now, when Sadie walked into the shed, Ridge turned his head. He heard, he saw, he was present. Sadie began to rebuild time. Each morning she rose early, mixing meds, boiling oatmeal, warming water to massage Ridge's sore muscles. She learned to blend herbs into his feed like her father used to when a horse had collapsed. Her hands grew calloused from raking straw, tightening ropes, cleaning Ridge's coat. But she didn't complain. Not once. Still, the deepest wounds weren't in Ridge's flesh. Colt Danner kept showing up, steady as the afternoon rain. He no longer wore his leather jacket, just a threadbare flannel shirt and sun-worn jeans. Each visit he brought something, sometimes oats, sometimes a small bottle of herbs, and once a worn leather-bound notebook, her father's notebook. "I kept it after he passed," Colt said softly one evening. "I didn't dare bring it until now." Sadie opened it slowly. The handwriting inside, sharp, steady, unapologetic, beat like an old pulse. "Not all horses are born to race. Some are born to remind us how to rise." She clutched it to her chest. And yet, no matter how many memories Colt brought, no matter what explanations he gave, Sadie kept her distance. She didn't forgive easily. Not for the years he vanished, not for the shame her father bore alone, and certainly not for the truth he had confessed, that Ridge was the product of an illegal breeding. She didn't know if she was angry at Colt, at her father, or at herself for not seeing it sooner. That night, while rubbing liniment into Ridge's legs, her hand froze. Just beneath the mane on his left shoulder was a faint, crescent-shaped scar with a small indentation at its center. Her heart skipped. She brushed aside the tangled fur, pulse pounding. "No way." Colt appeared behind her, following her gaze. His voice rasped. "Your father branded that himself. Bare hand. Red iron. No one knew. No one was supposed to. That mark, it was his. A crescent moon cradling a star. A bloodline unrecognized but enduring." Sadie lowered her head and placed her palm on the faded scar. She remembered. When she was little, she'd once asked about the funny birthmark. Her dad had only smiled. Some things aren't born to prove anything, just to exist. She swallowed the lump in her throat. Later that night, an envelope was slipped under the door of the main house. No return address, no note, just a white envelope embossed with the logo of the American Thoroughbred Registry, bold lettering, cold lines. She tore it open, and in a few short sentences, the world crashed down. Violation of Article 12, Section 7, harboring and rehabilitating an unregistered equine of unverifiable origin. Subject, Ridge McGraw. Requested for inspection. Non-compliance may result in seizure and humane processing. Sadie's hands shook. Her eyes landed on the final line, humane processing. No one wrote euthanasia. But everyone knew. The first person she told was Ellis. He said nothing for a long time, then murmured, "I got woods behind my property. If needed, I'll bury those bastards under it." Colt had a different offer. "I still have friends in the association. I can request an extension." Sadie looked at them both, then tore the letter in half, then into quarters, then into snowflake-sized scraps that fell onto the cold ground. "I'm not hiding," she said, voice as firm as iron nails. "I'm not begging. I'm not keeping Ridge's secret anymore. Not my father, not myself." Ellis nodded quietly. Colt looked down, wordless. She knew this decision was reckless, defiant, against the very system that had crushed men like her father. But because of that, she couldn't back down. That night, Ridge lay resting on the straw, his coat no longer brittle, no longer lifeless. Sadie sat beside him, hand resting on the scar. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw her father, sunburned face, rough hands, deep voice echoing in her bones. "You've got to stand for what no one else understands." Now she understood. Ridge wasn't a mistake. He was a statement. Not of victory, but of the value of existence. She no longer hid Ridge, not her legacy, not herself. Early April in Texas came with a pale sky and a damp wind that crept into your bones and stayed there. But inside the rotting old shed between straw and the scent of salve, Ridge was walking. Slow, short steps, but walking on his own. Sadie stood a few paces away, gently holding the lead rope, eyes locked on every tiny shift of Ridge's front leg. When he lifted his head, she said nothing, just reached out and laid her hand on his neck, a silent gesture of trust. "We don't have much time," she whispered. "But if you're ready to walk, I'm ready to go with you." She had submitted an application to the Red Rock Equine Showcase, an event nearly untouchable for those without pedigrees. It was where prestigious ranches brought horses worth hundreds of thousands, where judges wore white gloves and girls rode with ribbons from old money riding academies in Kentucky. Sadie had none of that. All she had was Ridge, a horse once sold for $1. Ellis was the first to find out. He showed up one morning in his old silver Dodge pickup, the one with a scar of a scratch down its side. "Heard you're taking him to Red Rock?" he asked, stepping into the shed. "I am," Sadie said, not turning. She was brushing Ridge's back. "They'll laugh in your face." "Good, at least they won't be turning their backs anymore." Ellis sighed and tossed her a sack. Inside was a weathered saddle kit. "Been keeping this since your daddy passed," said, "if she ever needs it, put it in her hands." Her hands trembled as she caught it. Colt knew too. No one told him. He just understood. And for the first time since returning, he quietly began mending the broken saddle. He restitched straps, polished every inch of leather. He didn't ask for thanks, didn't ask for credit. In the days that followed, Sadie and Ridge trained each morning. Not for competition, but for healing. Ridge learned to respond to the tilt of her hand, to turn when her body shifted, to slow when her fingers tensed, to stop when her eyes dropped. She didn't whistle, didn't whip, just spoke softly, like wind over grass. "That's right, buddy. We're still a team." One Thursday afternoon, as the sun filtered through the trees, Ridge turned his head toward the front gate. A strange truck sat 10 yards beyond the fence. A man in a suit stepped out, clipboard in hand, gold ring gleaming. Sadie didn't need to ask. He was from the Thoroughbred Registry. "Miss McGraw," he said, voice flat as a spreadsheet, "we received notice that you're harboring an unregistered equine of unverifiable origin." "Who sent that notice?" "I'm not authorized to disclose." Sadie smiled, but her eyes were steel. "Ridge isn't your property. He's my father's legacy, and he's not going anywhere." The man held out a document, tone stiffening. "Failure to comply may result in legal consequences." Sadie looked from the paper to Ridge, who stood beside her, steady as a soldier. "You can send all the paperwork you want," she said. "But if you want to lay a hand on this horse, you'll have to go through me." The man didn't reply. He turned and left, his glare heavy as concrete. That night, Ellis knocked on the door. "Guy from the registry came to my place," he grunted. "Asked if I was sheltering any illegal horses." Sadie sat on the porch steps, unsurprised. "I figured they'd come." Ellis handed her a map. "Back of my property, there's an old trail in the woods. If you need to hide Ridge, that's where I'd do it." Sadie took the map, studied it, then folded it up. "Thanks, but I'm not hiding." The morning of departure was crisp with a cold sun. Ridge stepped into the trailer steadier than he had in weeks. The rig itself was one Ellis had fixed up, old but strong. Pine scent and old sweat soaked into every nail and beam. Colt stood at the gate. He said nothing, just gave a silent nod. Sadie nodded back, then turned away. She wore her father's worn denim jacket, a straw hat with frayed edges, and boots still stained with the mud from the day she first found Ridge. As the truck rumbled down red dirt roads, past open plains and cowboy billboards, one phrase echoed in her mind: "We're not going to win. We're going to be seen." The Red Rock Equine Showcase looked like a pop-up village. White tents, shiny trailers, polished signs with the names of elite horse farms, women in crisp white shirts, silk scarves, and leather gloves, men in gray vests, pointy boots, and black sunglasses. When Ridge stepped down from the trailer, heads turned. Not because he was beautiful, but because he didn't belong. His coat still mottled, his mane uneven, a scar still visible under the sun. Sadie led him across the clay lot, past curious stares and half-hidden murmurs. "What breed is that?" "Doesn't show up on the competition list." "Must be some kind of exception?" She said nothing, offered no explanations, only one word pulsed inside: "Keep going." When it was Ridge's turn in the ring, the announcer's voice echoed: "Sadie McGraw, with Ridge, entry, Liberty demonstration." He stumbled over the name like he'd never seen it in the paperwork. Sadie led Ridge into the center of the arena. She unclipped the rope, took a long breath. No whip, no commands, just a tilt of her head. Ridge turned left, 1 step, 2 steps. He stopped. Sadie raised her hand. Ridge pivoted, lowered his head, turned again, poised, silent as stone. Every whisper vanished. A silence spread like a slow river. They didn't see an unregistered horse, they saw a soul that had never bowed. Afternoon at the Red Rock Equine Showcase glowed with a pale gold sunlight. casting long shadows over rows of tents in the distant paddocks, where finely groomed thoroughbreds grazed under the eyes of ranchers in tailored vests and champagne flutes in hand. Inside the main arena, after Ridge's performance, no one spoke. It hadn't been flawless. He'd stumbled slightly at the end, his rear left leg still uncertain, and his mane remained wind-tossed. But what Sadie and Ridge brought was something Red Rock had never seen before. A thread you couldn't see, but everyone could feel, woven tightly between human and horse. Sadie walked slowly to the center of the arena, expression calm, without pride. She expected backlash. It came, less than 30 seconds later. A man in a white shirt and neatly knotted tie shot to his feet in the front row, waving a judge's booklet. "That horse is unregistered," he barked, his voice booming through the mic. "This is a serious violation." Murmurs erupted in the stands. Some people turned, others snapped photos. Reporters lifted their cameras. The event staff exchanged glances, uneasy, uncertain. Sadie didn't flinch. Her hand remained on Ridge's neck. The horse stood still, unafraid. In fact, he held his head high, eyes forward, as if he knew his most important moment wasn't about movement at all. Sadie stepped into the spotlight, voice clear and steady. "That's right. He's not registered." The murmurs thickened. A few shook their heads. Some folded their arms. She continued. "This horse was starved, left motionless on the dirt floor of Weatherford's auction barn. Labeled with a $1 sign, no negotiation, no mercy. No one looked at him twice. No one thought he'd live." She stepped forward again. "But he did. He's here, on his own legs, and if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourselves why." Silence. No one had expected a girl in worn jeans, a frayed jacket, and mud-crusted boots to stand in the middle of Red Rock and say that. To speak directly to those who believed a being's worth could only be measured by paperwork and pedigree. Another judge, older, seated to the right, slowly removed his glasses and wiped them with a handkerchief. Then he rose. His face was unreadable, but his gaze was intent. "What's the horse's name?" he asked, voice soft but firm. Sadie turned to Ridge. She ran a hand down his muzzle, then looked back. "Ridge," she said. "His name is Ridge." The man nodded once. "I've judged showcases like this for 40 years. I've seen every bloodline, every technique, but I've never seen a connection like this one." A wave of murmurs rose again. Then, clap. From the far back row, someone started applauding. A second clap. Then a third. Slow, awkward. And then it spread, soft, steady, building like the tide. Not loud, not wild, but sincere. Ridge lifted his head, ears flicking toward the sound. He didn't understand applause, but he felt Sadie's breath change, the release in her touch. He felt seen. Colt stood near the arena rail, in a plain shirt, arms crossed. When Sadie's eyes met his, he gave a nod, quiet, firm. Just like her father used to when she brought a horse back to the barn after a clean ride. No words needed. Sadie led Ridge out of the ring, walking between rows of spectators who had fallen quiet once more. She didn't know what had shifted, but she knew this. Ridge was no longer a problem. He was a presence. A horse once rejected, now standing in the center of the light. That evening, Red Rock lit up. Cocktail parties began. People in blazers laughed and sipped their drinks. But the air changed when Sadie passed by. Some nodded, some simply watched. She didn't mind. She brought Ridge to the temporary stables Red Rock had arranged, laid down fresh straw, checked his bandages, then sat in silence under the yellow glow of a round barn light. Footsteps approached behind her. "You did it," Colt said from beyond the rail. Sadie didn't turn. "Not for you." "I know. Not for praise." "I know that too. Not to make anyone's records look good." He paused. "But you made them look, made them see, and now they can't pretend they didn't." Sadie glanced toward Ridge. He was lying down, eyes half closed, somewhere between rest and dreams. She gently placed her hand on the crescent and star scar, her father's secret mark. "This horse doesn't need medals," she said. "Just the right to be what he is." Colt nodded, eyes softening. "I once thought I could change the world," he murmured. "But then I ran. You came back, and you did what we never dared." Sadie didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because what she felt, words couldn't hold. No trophies, no pedigree. Ridge had been seen, not as a horse, but as a symbol. The night after the showcase, Red Rock fell into a hush, as if the day's noise had been folded into the dust beneath the moonlight. Trailers rolled out one by one, a quiet migration after the spectacle. What remained was the sound of frogs by the creek and the soft glow of lamps in the temporary stalls. Sadie sat against the wall of the barn, knees drawn to her chest, her father's faded denim jacket draped over her lap. Ridge lay just a few feet away, head resting on fresh straw, breathing steady. Every time he blinked, her heart softened with relief. Not because they'd won, not because of applause, but because Ridge was still alive. Still Ridge. Footsteps approached. Ellis. His hands were stained with dirt, as if he'd just come from digging weeds. In his hand was a slim envelope. He didn't speak, just held it out. "This, he left it," Ellis said. "Told me to give it to you only if you ever brought Ridge home." Sadie didn't take it right away. She stared at it for a long moment, like it might explode in her hands. Then, slowly, she opened the flap. Inside was a single sheet of aged paper, ink faded to blue-gray. "Sadie, if you're reading this, it means you're stronger than I ever was. I made a lot of mistakes. But the one thing I got right was believing that some souls can't be defined by papers and shouldn't be sold like property. Ridge isn't perfect, but he's the rebellion of freedom. Don't let anyone convince you he's not worth remembering. Dad." Sadie folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. No tears came, just a sense that something heavy, buried deep, was finally lifting, like dust swept out of a forgotten room. The next morning, sunlight poured straight through the barn door. Rare, warm, and clear after so many gray days. Ridge stood early, no prompting. He moved slowly, head high, ears alert to every sound, as if he had grown used to being seen. Sadie saddled him gently, not to ride, just to reacquaint him with the feeling. Her hands didn't tremble anymore. Every motion was steady, like she'd done it 1,000 times, even though they'd only just begun again. She mounted slowly. The wind brushed through the rafters, carrying the scent of post-rain earth and sweet spring grass. She didn't ride far, just a quiet loop around the patchy field behind the shed where squirrels darted under a broken fence. But to Sadie, it felt like a victory lap. She remembered how her father used to say, "Don't ride a horse to prove anything. Ride to understand each other." And now, with Ridge's steady gait beneath her, she understood. Colt left that same afternoon. No goodbyes, no knock on the door. Just a folded note, wedged in the shed's entrance. "Thank you for letting me witness something right, at least once." Sadie read it, then tossed it into the fire pit behind the barn. She didn't need to keep his regrets. What mattered more was what Ridge was becoming. 3 days after the showcase, a car pulled into Sadie's driveway. A silver sedan. A woman with silver hair in a gray blazer stepped out. She introduced herself as a representative from the National Equine Heritage Board, not the registry. "We received a video," she said plainly. "We watched." Sadie said nothing, just waited. "We're not here to argue. We'd like to extend an invitation. If you're willing to share Ridge's story at our Community Horsemanship and Heritage Summit, we won't pursue any legal action." Sadie looked toward Ridge, who was sniffing a patch of wildflowers near the fence. "No pity," she said flatly. "No," the woman nodded, "just a need to remember what we've forgotten." Sadie gave a small nod. No handshake, no signatures, but the woman understood and left without another word or another form. That weekend, Ellis brought over a ribbon, not a blue one, not a trophy, just one marked Honor of Presentation. An award given for reasons no rulebook could ever capture. Sadie pinned it to the barn wall, beside her father's old saddle and a faded photograph of her as an 8-year-old girl, on Ridge's back when he was still a gangly foal. She looked at Ridge as she filled his trough with straw. "You don't have to prove anything anymore. Not to me, not to anyone. You just have to be you." Ridge let out a deep sigh, gentle like the first breeze of spring. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the western hills, Sadie sat on the porch, cradling a cold cup of coffee. Ridge stood beside her, ears alert, eyes half closed, not sleeping, just content. The wind carried stories unspoken. And in the golden hush of twilight, 2 shadows stretched long across the ground, girl and horse, blending into one another like they'd belonged together from the very beginning. No one asked what Ridge's bloodline was anymore. No one questioned where he came from, because now he belonged to the light. Darkness had fallen, but in Ridge's eyes there was light. If you believe that a creature's worth isn't found in papers, but in the way it rises after being left behind, leave a 1 in the comments below. If you've ever witnessed a moment of rebirth between a human and an animal that stayed with you, drop a 0. And if Sadie and Ridge's journey left a lump in your throat, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next story, where freedom, trust, and life itself are told through the eyes of souls that can never be tamed.